I never believed people when they said some jobs came with warnings nobody could explain. After losing my warehouse job without notice, I needed money immediately. Bills kept arriving, my savings disappeared, and I couldn't afford to wait for another opportunity. Driving for Uber looked like the quickest way to get back on my feet. The sign-up process was simple, and before long I was picking up passengers all over the city. Night shifts paid better, so I worked until sunrise almost every day. My first night started quietly. Around midnight, I stopped at a small gas station to grab coffee and stretch my legs. While I stood beside my car, another Uber driver pulled into the next parking space. He looked exhausted, much older than me, with tired eyes that made it seem like he hadn't slept in weeks. He didn't smile or introduce himself. Instead, he stared at my Uber sticker before speaking in a low voice. If the app ever sends you to yellow stop 13 after midnight, cancel the ride immediately. Don't ask why. Before I could respond, he climbed back into his car and drove away. I actually laughed to myself. I figured it was just another creepy story older drivers told newcomers for fun. Every workplace has people who enjoy scaring beginners. Weeks passed, and nothing unusual happened. I drove tourists, students, airport travelers, and late-night workers. Some rides were strange, but nothing beyond the usual. Eventually, I forgot about the old driver's warning completely. Then one night, everything changed. The clock on my dashboard read exactly 12:47 a.m. I had just dropped off a passenger and was waiting for my next request when my phone vibrated. Before I even reached for it, the Uber app made a sound I had never heard before. A ride accepted itself without me touching the screen. Confused, I grabbed my phone and looked at the pickup location. Yellow, stop 13. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I immediately tried to cancel, but the usual red button was gone. I closed the app and opened it again. Still nothing. I restarted my phone. The request remained active as though it had been locked in place. The navigation had already started. A new route appeared on the screen, leading toward a road I had never noticed before. For the first time since becoming a driver, I seriously considered turning the car around. But the app refused to close, and the destination kept pulling me closer to a place I had been warned never to visit. The navigation led me farther away from the city until every familiar street disappeared behind me. Houses became fewer, traffic vanished, and even the radio faded into loud static. After nearly 20 minutes, the GPS told me to slow down. Ahead, a lonely bus stop stood beside the road beneath a single yellow streetlight. Its glow seemed strangely bright against the darkness around it. A weathered sign beside the bench read only 3 words. Yellow, stop 13. There was nobody else in sight. No passing cars. No nearby buildings. The silence felt unnatural, as though the whole place had been abandoned years ago. A tall figure waited beneath the light. They wore an old yellow raincoat that looked faded with age. The hood covered their entire face, hiding every feature. The person never waved or stepped forward. They simply stood there without moving. I stopped beside the curb and reached toward the door lock. Before my hand touched the button, the rear seat shifted with a soft creak. I froze. The passenger was already sitting behind me. I never heard a door open. My heart started racing as I looked toward the side mirror. Every door remained shut. The windows had never moved. Somehow the stranger had entered my car without making a single sound. Almost instantly the temperature dropped. My breath became visible in front of me. Frost slowly spread across the edges of the windshield even though it was the middle of summer. I turned the heater to its highest setting, but only freezing air came through the vents. Trying to stay calm, I forced a smile. "Good evening. Where are we heading?" No answer. I cleared my throat and asked again, "Can you please confirm your destination?" Silence. The only sound inside the car came from the engine quietly idling. A second later, the GPS flashed. The route changed by itself. Instead of following one road, the blue line twisted onto another street I had never noticed before. After only a minute, it changed again. Then again. Every few minutes, the destination shifted somewhere else. None of it made sense. I glanced into the rearview mirror. The passenger was sitting directly behind my seat. A few seconds later, I looked again. Now they were seated behind the front passenger seat without making any movement. Another glance. They had moved to the center of the back seat. No footsteps. No rustling clothes. Nothing. Each time I checked the mirror, they were somewhere different, sitting perfectly still beneath the hood, as if they had never moved at all. I stopped looking, afraid of where I might see them next. I kept driving because the GPS never stopped giving directions. Every turn pulled me farther from the city until the familiar roads disappeared completely. Tall buildings gave way to thick forests, broken fences, and empty fields. The pavement became so narrow that 2 cars could barely pass each other. I had lived in this area my whole life, yet I had never seen these roads before. The passenger remained silent behind me. I reached for my phone and opened Google Maps, hoping to compare the route. My stomach tightened the moment the map loaded. According to Google, I wasn't driving on any road at all. My blue location dot floated in the middle of a blank green area with no streets, no landmarks, and no nearby towns. This has to be a GPS error, I whispered to myself. I refreshed the map several times, but nothing changed. The Uber navigation, however, continued working perfectly. It tracked every turn with impossible accuracy, speaking calmly as if this hidden route had always existed. A few minutes later, my phone lost all signal. No bars, no mobile data, no internet. Even the emergency call icon disappeared. I tried sending a message to my brother, but it failed instantly. I couldn't load a single web page or refresh the weather. By every normal rule, the Uber app should have stopped working too. Instead, the ride timer continued counting upward. The route updated without delay. The screen showed my exact speed, every turn ahead, and the distance remaining. It behaved as though it were connected to something that didn't need a network. Outside, the surroundings became stranger with every mile. Abandoned houses stood hidden behind overgrown trees. Their windows were dark, and most of the roofs had collapsed long ago. Rusted cars rested beside cracked driveways, covered with vines as if nobody had touched them for decades. Every streetlight I passed gave off the same unnatural yellow glow. None of the bulbs flickered. None seemed connected to power lines. Then I noticed another bus stop. It looked exactly like the first one. The same faded yellow paint. The same lonely bench. The same silent light. Someone stood beneath it. They didn't wave. They didn't move. As I drove closer, I tried to make out their face, but it remained hidden in shadow despite the bright light overhead. Several miles later, another stop appeared. Another person waited there. Then another. And another. Every figure stood perfectly still beneath a yellow lamp, facing the road as though expecting someone to arrive. I slowed down as I passed one of them. For a split second, I thought I saw where the face should have been. There was nothing. Only darkness beneath the hood. A chill ran through my body. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and forced myself to keep my eyes on the road. Deep inside, I realized I wasn't driving through a forgotten part of the world anymore. I had entered a place that wasn't meant to exist. The road stretched endlessly through the forest. Every mile looked exactly like the last, with yellow streetlights casting long shadows across the empty pavement. I had stopped checking the time because it no longer seemed to matter. The GPS kept guiding me forward, and the passenger remained completely silent behind me. Then I noticed flashing lights ahead. At first, I thought they belonged to a police car. Relief washed over me. I pressed the accelerator, hoping I had finally found someone who could explain where I was. As I got closer, my relief disappeared. The flashing lights belonged to several Uber cars parked neatly along the side of the road. Their hazard lights blinked in perfect rhythm, lighting up the trees around them. Every vehicle looked abandoned until I noticed someone sitting inside each one. Every driver remained behind the steering wheel. None of them moved. None of them looked toward the road. Their hands rested exactly where mine were now, gripping the wheel as though frozen in place. I slowed almost to a stop while passing the first car. The driver stared straight ahead with empty eyes. The next car looked the same. Then another. Their faces were pale, and not one of them reacted to my headlights. As I reached the last vehicle in the line, the driver suddenly lifted one hand. I nearly jumped. Slowly, he pressed a folded sheet of paper against his side window. Large black letters covered the page. "D. not. Let the passenger leave." I read the message twice, barely believing my eyes. My first instinct was to stop and ask what it meant. I hit the brakes and reached for the gear shift. Before I could pull over, every hazard light switched off at the same moment. The darkness swallowed the road. I quickly looked into my side mirror. The parked cars were gone. Confused, I checked the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me except the empty road disappearing into the trees. No flashing lights. No drivers. No tire tracks. It was as if they had never existed. My breathing became fast and uneven. Had I imagined everything? Then, without warning, a calm voice filled the freezing car. "You weren't supposed to see them." I nearly lost control of the steering wheel. It was the passenger. For the first time since entering my car, they had spoken. The voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried a weight that made every hair on my arms stand up. I wanted to ask who those drivers were. I wanted to know why they had tried to warn me. But before I could speak, The GPS announced another turn in its calm electronic voice, leading me deeper into the darkness while the silent figure behind me said nothing else. My hands would not stop shaking after the passenger spoke. The silence inside the car felt heavier than before, and every mile made me more certain that I was trapped inside something no normal person could explain. Trying to distract myself, I remembered the strange discussions I used to read on Uber driver forums late at night. Most drivers shared stories about rude passengers, accidents, or strange pickup locations. Every so often, someone would post a list of odd rules without giving any explanation. People usually laughed in the comments and called them fake horror stories. Back then, I laughed too. Now, every word returned to me with frightening clarity. Never stop the car if the passenger tells you to pull over. Never look directly into their face. Never unlock the doors after 2:00 a.m. Never answer if they call your name. I had always believed those warnings were written by bored people trying to scare new drivers. After everything I had already seen, they suddenly felt less like stories and more like survival instructions. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 1:58 a.m. Only 2 minutes remained before the final rule became important. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead. Then I heard it. A calm voice from the back seat. Daniel Carter. My entire body froze. The passenger had spoken my full name. Not just my first name. My full name. I had never introduced myself. My driver profile only displayed my first name to passengers. There was no possible way for anyone sitting behind me to know the rest. For a moment, I almost answered without thinking. What? The word reached my lips before I forced myself to stay silent. The warning echoed inside my head. Never answer if they call your name. The passenger did not repeat it. Instead, the freezing silence returned. A loud knock suddenly struck the driver's window. Bang, bang, bang. I nearly swerved off the road. Someone outside was pounding on the glass. Please help me, a desperate voice shouted. I've been trying to stop someone for hours. I turned my head toward the window. A man stood only inches away, despite the car still moving slowly down the road. His face was pale with fear. He kept hitting the glass harder. You have to let me in. Please. Then my heart stopped. The man wasn't a stranger. He was me. The same jacket. The same tired face. The same small scar above my left eyebrow. Even my terrified expression matched perfectly. My double kept begging through the closed window while running beside the car at an impossible speed. Don't listen to the passenger, he screamed. Open the door before it's too late. I stared in horror, unable to breathe. Then I remembered another warning I had almost forgotten. Nothing outside the car wants to save you. Without taking my eyes off the road again, I pressed harder on the accelerator as the knocking slowly faded into the darkness behind me. The endless road finally began to widen, and the GPS announced that I had arrived at a scheduled stop. Ahead stood an old gas station surrounded by darkness. The building looked abandoned, with faded signs, cracked concrete, and weeds growing through the parking lot. Yet every light was on. The fuel pumps glowed brightly, and the store windows shined as though employees had just opened for business. I slowly pulled into the parking area and immediately noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Uber cars. They were everywhere. Dozens of them sat parked in perfect rows facing the building. Some looked almost new, while others were older models covered with dust and rust. Every vehicle displayed an Uber sticker on the windshield. None of them showed any sign of life. As I drove between the rows, I realized every driver's door stood wide open. No passengers. No drivers. Just empty cars waiting in complete silence. The GPS finally went quiet. For the first time since the ride had started, the screen stopped giving directions. The passenger reached for the door. Without looking at me, the calm voice said only 3 words. Wait here. The rear door opened by itself. The figure in the yellow raincoat stepped onto the pavement and slowly walked toward the convenience store. I watched through the windshield as the passenger disappeared inside without once looking back. Every instinct told me to leave. I pressed the accelerator. Nothing happened. The engine continued running, but the car refused to move even an inch. I shifted into reverse. Still nothing. It felt as though invisible hands were holding the tires in place. With no other choice, I climbed out of the car. The air outside felt colder than before. Not a single insect made a sound. Even the wind seemed unwilling to blow across the empty parking lot. Inside the store, bright lights hummed overhead. Fresh coffee still sat in paper cups on the counter. Steam no longer rose from them, but they looked as though someone had walked away only moments earlier. Half-eaten sandwiches rested on small tables. A newspaper lay open beside a chair. A cash register remained switched on. Everything suggested people had been living normal lives before vanishing without warning. I searched every aisle but found nobody. Then I spotted the passenger. The yellow raincoat moved toward the back of the building. A heavy metal door stood at the end of a narrow hallway. It looked like an ordinary storage room, except it couldn't possibly exist. From outside, the building was far too small to contain another hallway that long. The passenger reached the door without using a key. It slowly opened on its own. Beyond the doorway waited complete darkness. The figure stepped inside. The metal door closed quietly behind them. I stood frozen in the empty store, staring at the wall where no room should have existed, wondering what could possibly be hidden beyond that impossible door. I kept staring at the metal door long after the passenger disappeared behind it. Every part of me wanted to run back to my car, but another part needed answers. Nothing about this place made sense. If I left without understanding what was happening, I doubted I would ever escape. Near the cash register, I noticed a door marked Office. It was slightly open. I stepped inside. The room was small, filled with old filing cabinets, dusty shelves, and a wooden desk covered with faded papers. A calendar still hung on the wall, but the year printed on it was almost impossible to read. Everything looked untouched for a very long time. I searched through the desk, opening one drawer after another. Most contained old receipts, empty folders, and broken pens. The bottom drawer was locked. After several hard pulls, the handle suddenly snapped free. Inside rested a thick, black notebook. Its leather cover had cracked with age, and the pages were stained yellow. Across the front, someone had written 3 words in black ink. Driver logbook. I slowly opened the first page. The handwriting belonged to someone named Michael. He described accepting a late-night ride after his app selected it automatically. He mentioned a lonely bus stop under a yellow light, and a passenger wearing an old yellow raincoat. My pulse quickened. The next entry came from another driver years later. The details were almost identical. Yellow stop 13, silent passenger, impossible roads, the freezing cold. I turned page after page. Every writer told the same story. Only the names changed. Some entries were detailed, filled with desperate attempts to explain what they had seen. Others became shaky near the end, as if fear had made it difficult to keep writing. Several stopped in the middle of unfinished sentences. One page ended with only 4 words. I hear him calling, "Nothing followed." Another driver had written just a single line across an otherwise blank page. He finally got out. Those 4 words appeared again and again throughout the notebook. Always the same, always alone. I kept flipping through the pages faster, searching for something that explained how any of them escaped. There was nothing. The final page waited at the very back. It looked newer than the others. My hands began trembling before I even read it. Written neatly across the top was my full name, Daniel Carter. Underneath it was today's date. The ink looked fresh. Below my name, only one sentence had been written. Ride accepted at 12:47 a.m. I felt the blood drain from my face. Nobody could have known I would be here. Nobody should even know my full name. Yet someone had already started writing my story before I had opened the notebook. As I stood frozen, I heard slow footsteps echo from the hallway outside the office. The passenger was coming back. I quickly closed the notebook and slipped it back into the drawer, but my hands would not stop shaking. The slow footsteps grew louder until they stopped outside the office door. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then the passenger quietly stepped inside. The yellow raincoat looked older than before, as though it had collected years of dust in only a few minutes. In one gloved hand, the figure carried a large metal key covered in rust. It looked ancient, heavy enough to belong to the gate of an old prison rather than anything inside a gas station. Without saying a word, the passenger turned and walked toward the exit. Something inside me refused to stay silent any longer. "What is this place?" I asked. The figure stopped walking. For the first time, the passenger answered without hesitation. "This is only a stop." The voice remained calm, almost emotionless. I swallowed hard before asking another question. "Who are you?" A long silence followed. Finally, the passenger spoke again. "I have had many names. None of them matter now." The answer only made everything worse. We walked back toward my car together. The cold air surrounded us again, and the rows of empty Uber vehicles remained exactly where they had been. Every open driver's door seemed to be waiting for someone who would never return. Before getting into the back seat, the passenger looked down at the rusted key. "Every few years," the voice said softly, "someone must drive me to the last stop. I stared in confusion. Why me? You were chosen. I never accepted this. You did. I shook my head. The app accepted it. The passenger gave a slow nod. That is how it works now. A heavy silence filled the parking lot. Then the figure continued speaking. Long before ride-sharing services existed, others carried me. Horse riders, wagon drivers, taxi drivers, bus drivers. The road always remained the same. Only the vehicles changed. A chill ran through me. The ride had never belonged to Uber. The company had simply become the newest way to reach people willing to drive at night. The app does not create the journey, the passenger said. It only finds the next driver. I suddenly understood the notebook. The stories stretched back far beyond the age of smartphones. The older entries were not mistakes. They were records of the same journey repeating across generations. What happens if I refuse? I whispered. The passenger rested the old key across both hands. If the chosen driver leaves, another innocent driver is selected. Images of the parked cars flashed through my mind. Every empty seat, every open door, every unfinished story. The road did not end because someone escaped. It simply waited for the next person desperate enough to accept a ride after midnight. Without another word, the passenger opened the rear door and quietly sat down. The GPS came back to life. One destination appeared on the screen. The last stop. The GPS guided me away from the abandoned gas station without a single wrong turn. The road became narrower until thick trees surrounded both sides of the car. Their branches stretched over the pavement, blocking out the sky. It felt like I had been driving through the same forest forever. Every mile looked identical, and the dashboard clock had stopped moving. I had no idea how long I had been behind the wheel. The passenger remained silent. Then the GPS spoke one final time. Destination ahead. The trees suddenly opened, and I slammed on the brakes. A massive bus terminal stood before me. Its walls were painted a faded yellow that seemed to glow under the strange lights surrounding it. The building was enormous, far larger than any station I had ever seen. Yet there wasn't a single person waiting outside. The parking area stretched across what looked like several football fields. Hundreds of abandoned vehicles filled every space. I slowly drove past them. Old yellow school buses rested beside modern city buses. Rusted taxis stood next to shiny black sedans. Police cruisers, ambulances, delivery vans, and Uber cars from different years sat motionless in endless rows. Some looked as though they had arrived only yesterday. Others had been swallowed by rust and vines. No matter how old they were, every driver's door stood open. Every seat was empty. The passenger quietly opened the rear door and stepped onto the pavement. Without looking back, the figure walked toward the center of the terminal. I followed from several steps behind, unable to stop myself. The entrance hall was completely silent. Dust covered the floor, yet fresh footprints appeared beneath the yellow raincoat. At the far end of the building stood something that didn't belong. A giant black doorway. It had no frame, no visible door, only complete darkness waiting beneath the terminal. The rusted key remained in the passenger's hand. As we approached, faint whispers drifted from inside the darkness. Thousands of voices spoke at once. None were loud enough to understand, but together they sounded like people begging, crying, and calling from somewhere impossibly far away. The sound made my head ache. I looked away from the doorway and noticed the walls. Every surface was covered with names carved into the stone. Thousands of them. Some carvings looked centuries old. Others appeared much newer. Different handwriting covered every section. Some names had dates beside them. Others had only initials. I slowly walked along the wall, reading one name after another. Then I stopped breathing. Near the end of the wall, fresh marks cut through the stone. The dust had not even settled. My full name was carved there. Daniel Carter. The letters looked as though they had been etched only moments earlier. I reached out with trembling fingers but couldn't bring myself to touch them. Behind me, the whispers grew louder. Ahead, the passenger stood waiting before the black doorway, holding the rusted key as though the final part of the journey had finally begun. I stood frozen beneath the yellow terminal, staring at my name carved into the stone wall. The whispers pouring from the black doorway grew louder with every passing second. They no longer sounded distant. It felt as though they were standing just beyond the darkness, waiting for someone to make a single mistake. The passenger slowly turned toward me. For the first time, the hood lifted slightly. Even then, I could not clearly see a face. The darkness beneath it seemed deeper than the night around us. The rusted key rested quietly in one hand. "There is one final rule," the passenger said. My throat felt dry. What rule? The answer came without emotion. No new driver is ever told. I waited. Once the ride begins, the passenger must never be left alone. I stared at the figure, struggling to understand. If the passenger is left behind, the voice continued, the one waiting beyond this doorway is free to choose another way out. I slowly looked toward the endless darkness. Something inside it moved. Not clearly, not completely, just enough to tell me something was waiting, something much larger than any person. You brought me here, the passenger said. Now I must go where I have always gone. Without another word, the figure stepped toward the doorway. The blackness seemed to swallow the yellow raincoat one step at a time. The whispers suddenly stopped. The silence became even more terrifying. Within seconds, the passenger disappeared completely. I was alone. Nothing happened. I stood there, hardly breathing, convincing myself the nightmare had finally ended. Then I heard it. A slow, heavy footstep echoed from deep inside the darkness. Another followed. The ground beneath my feet vibrated. Whatever was approaching was far bigger than the passenger had ever been. The sound grew closer, closer. Every step carried impossible weight. Fear finally broke my paralysis. I turned and ran toward my car. The abandoned vehicles remained silent as I sprinted through the parking lot. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. Before I could start the engine, my phone vibrated. The Uber app had opened by itself. A new notification appeared across the screen. Passenger picked up. Please complete your trip. My hands shook so badly that I almost dropped the phone. Behind the terminal, another thunderous footstep echoed through the night. Something enormous was coming. I locked every door. The windows refused to roll up. The engine would not start. Then I heard the sound I had feared since the ride began. Click. The rear door unlocked by itself. I didn't turn around. Every instinct screamed at me not to look. The back door slowly opened. The suspension of the car sank as something impossibly heavy climbed into the rear seat. The door gently closed. The freezing air returned. A calm voice from directly behind me whispered only 4 words. You may drive now. I never looked into the rearview mirror again.